It was the greatest contribution towards the whole of the human race made by China is to prevent its 1.3 billion people from hunger. All the work of the party's news and public opinion media must reflect the will of the party, mirror the views of the party, preserve the authority of the party, preserve the unity of the party, and achieve love of the party. In the Soviet Union, where the military was depoliticized, separated from the party, and nationalized, the party was disarmed. When the country came to crisis point, a big party was gone just like that. Why we must stand firm on the party's leadership over the military? Because that's the lesson from the collapse of the Soviet Union. To further promote anti-corruption efforts, we need to insist on the successful experiences gained through the party's long-term anti-corruption practice. China's headlong plunge into capitalism over the last 40 years was not a repudiation of the Communist Party's founding ideology, but something possible only because of it. That was Xi Jinping. And this is All Minus One. Hey, folks, please like, share, subscribe, help me grow. Make sure you are subscribed because YouTube likes to show me I have new subscribers and then take them away like a day later. So please do that. If you are not watching me on YouTube, then give me a like or a thumbs up or whatever else on whatever alt tech you're looking at. So I am on Rumbles, I am on BitChute, I am on PeerTube. All those links are in the description. I also have a locals page, and there is a live show, The Ends Justify the Memes. We are live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That is 7 p.m. Eastern. We go live on YouTube and DLive. And this past Wednesday, that was March 3rd, we were supposed to have Kit Culp, and Kit and I had a miscommunication about the date. So we will be having a show this Sunday at 7 p.m. to accommodate him because, well, that's the people that we are. So, folks, let's get into it. The century of humiliation. I talked about this last time. And what are we talking about? What is the big topic? What is the whole thing? Well, it's the Chinese century. It's the Chinese takeover. It's the Chinese 100-year plan, which is supposed to come to fruition by 2050. Now, the Chinese century, the idea of the Chinese century is that this century, the 21st century, will be ruled by Chinese rule. They will be the world's superpower, much like the United States was in the 20th century and the UK was in the 19th century. The century of humiliation, though, is this concept that China must take some sort of revenge on the years in which it was oppressed by Western powers, by the powers of Russia and and Japan, as well as other European interests. And so because of that, we are going to bolster up our nation, that is China speaking, and ensure that this can never happen again. So I started to get into this article before, but couldn't read it for lack of time, so we'll delve into it a little bit. This is from The Economist. The new hegemon. The Chinese century is well underway. Many trends that appear global are in fact mostly Chinese. And here I showed this little infographic before. It says, when scholars of international relations predicted that the 2000s will be a Chinese century, they're not being premature. Although America remains the lone superpower, China has already replaced it as the driver of global change, which we have done purposefully, which was done via opening up trade with China and trying to turn it into a capitalist-style nation. Now, you just heard that quote from Xi, and he was saying, well, that's perfectly in line with communism, which actually, in many ways, it is, as long as there is a lack of competition and things are centrally controlled by the government. I find it funny when communists tell me that monopolies and market competition as far as having protectionist type plans are a free market system. And I'm thinking, no. Every time I debate them, I tell them, no, communists create monopolies because the government runs everything, or leftist, if you would. Xi is taking on a point that essentially the fascists took, and that was, well, allow the free markets, but have them controlled by the governments, have the resources controlled by the governments. If China wants to produce something, what they do is they call a factory and they say, do this now, or we will shut you down. And guess what? The factory owner will make a profit, but they do what the Chinese government says. So let's read some of this article. There's one economic metric on which the Chinese already ranks first, measuring the market exchange rate. China's GDP is still 40% smaller than the US's. However, on a purchasing power parity basis, which adjusted currencies so that a basket of goods and services is worth the same amount in different countries, the Chinese economy became the world's largest in 2013. Keep that in mind, folks. This gets into the real GDP and whatever else. So China's GDP per person grew by 903% from 1990 to 2017. That's pretty impressive. China's record has exerted a gravitational pull on the world's economic output. The Economist has calculated a geographic center of the global economy by taking an average of each country's latitude and longitude, weighed by their GDP, at the height of the American dominance. This point sat in the North Atlantic, but China has tugged it so far east that the global center of economic gravity is now in Siberia, because China is so populous and is developing so quickly. It is responsible for a remarkable share of global change. Since the start of the financial crisis in 2008, for example, China has accounted for 45% of the grain in world GDP. And that's important, folks. You cannot just measure gross domestic product. You have to understand who controls the supply lines. See, Keynesians think short term. They're only thinking about the here and now and how they can control the market in the moment. They are never looking at 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, 40 years, 50, 60, 80, 100. They're never looking that far ahead. They're okay with sticking your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren with debt. They don't care. They only care about the perceived comfort of the folks in the day. And it creates, of course, constant problems. The Chinese, on the other hand, even though they use largely Keynesian-style models, are looking toward a longer term. So that's why they are developing their banking systems. That's why they're producing more. That's why they are buying up land around the world so they can have resources around the world. And they're not caught with their pants down like we were at the beginning of the coup. It says in 1990, some 750 million Chinese lived in extreme poverty. Today, fewer than 10 million do. That represents 2/3 of the world's decline in poverty during that time. Again, impressive. How did this happen? Well, we let it happen. We helped it along. And actually, I'm perfectly fine with this for the Chinese people. The problem is the CCP. And the problem outside of the CCP is well, Disney, Google, Apple, whomever else, name a big corporation that has a lot of authority and power, the NBA, the NFL, whomever else, Hollywood, are all now carrying and marketing toward China because they want that sweet, sweet bottom line, that dollar. This has nothing to do with morality, folks. It has nothing to do with good leadership. It all has to do with the dollar, the bottom line for these folks. And China, of course, we know has horrendous human rights violations, yet they are bold enough and willing enough to lecture us about such issues. It is just the nature of the world. It is a big, awful, terrible place run by awful, terrible people who could care less about anyone except for themselves. For all its talk of a peaceful rise, China has steadily beefed up its military investment, even as the rest of the world cut back half after the end of the Cold War. As a result, the People's Liberation Army accounts for over 60% of the total increase in global defense spending since 1990. And all of this growth has come at a considerable cost to the environment. China is also a source of 55% of the increase in the world's carbon emissions since 1990. Over half. Yet old Greta is not over there lecturing them. She is taking boats here to the United States to be green friendly to lecture us who have cut our emissions tremendously under Donald John Trump. So, let's keep going. And I'm going to remind you of that fossil fuel thing here in a bit. So this is from transnational.live. China's 100-year plan is all about development, not deception. So here we have a little bit of a different perspective. This is from December 7th, 2018. China went from being one of the poorest countries on the planet. Let me make this bigly, folks, so you can read it as well as I. There we go. China went from being one of the poorest countries on the planet to one of the most powerful. China's remarkable development has pulled hundreds of millions of its citizens out of poverty and greatly contributes to global peace and prosperity. Well, you might want to know how this happened. How did this happen? This happened basically because the U.S. decided to start trade there, to start building up manufacturing there, even though manufacturing was largely done in Japan at the time. And then we started subsidizing China. We started giving money to China. That's exactly what happened here, folks. And we do it all the time. We could have been building up our own nation, our own interior, taking care of our own people, having more jobs here, taking care of our roads or infrastructure, crumbling bridges, all kinds of things that need to be taken care of here at home. But we are a globalist nation. We aren't a nation of the people, for the people, or by the people. As Abraham Lincoln once said, we are a nation for the globalist, by the globalist, of the globalist and their globalist agendas, which is to have a one world communistic fascistic style government. But this significant impact also triggered a negative response in some quarters of the United States. In his book, The 100 Years Marathon, Michael Pillsbury, I told you we'd be talking about him a lot, director of the Chinese strategy at the Hudson Institution, sounded a clarion call. China has a secret 100-year plan built on a series of strategic deceptions to supplant the United States as the world superpower. The rise of China, in his view, is a threat. And we're going to keep talking about this. Here we go. More interesting, reported by the Washington Free Beacon in 2015, which wrote that Mao Zedong put into action a strategic deception plan to dupe the West into thinking that China was a helpless victim, and therefore the United States has to help them and give away things to them and make sure they stay friendly. Pillsbury was quoted as saying at the time. This is not to say that everything in the garden is rosy. China and the United States have their fair share of challenges, and the transition from unipolar world to a multipolar one is full of its own set of challenges. First off, there's never been a unipolar world. Now, there have been empires all throughout history, and there have more or less always been regional empires. So the East, the Far East, the Orient, as it once was called, or is still called in some parts of the UK, where China is at, that's always had its own empires. And then the West had its empires, and here, even in the United States, there were empires of their own. Right? We know of the Mayas, the Incas. We know that there were American empires. Less developed because those folks were still technically in the Stone Age. They never developed a wheel. They never had beasts of burden. But they still developed great structures and societies. We find this all over the world. The difference now is that we have entered an era of global communication, global travel, and because of that, certain people want to have complete global financial institutions and government. It's not a good idea. They also want a one world religion. That's a whole nother issue I could get into. And it ain't wokeness, folks. It ain't wokeness. It's definitely not Christianity. It's more about the worship of Mother Earth and humanism, the intellect. In any case, I digress. But this reality is a far cry from the saying that China has been following an elaborate plan to supplant the United States. The most important question that flows from this discussion is whether China is a threat. It's clear from Pillsbury and the President Donald Trump leading the authority on China, and U.S. Vice President Mike Pence cited the China speech that some people in Washington believe China is a threat and thus want to contain China. In 2017, the U.S. National Security Strategy, for example, the U.S. government warned that China is out to challenge American power and influence around the globe. Well, if this is, a pissing contest to who is stronger, sure. But this isn't about that, folks. This China isn't necessarily a threat and that we're going to go to war with China, although I would be concerned with that. Not as something imminent, but just generally speaking, because they are the other global world power. But more importantly, we have to consider that the Chinese government is the plan for the world government. And that seems to be the case. Everyone seems to be behind China. Recall, at Davos, that is the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab interviewed Xi Jinping. Mentioned nothing of the coup either, or that China caused it. Instead, it was a bunch of empty platitudes about, how the world must change and work together. The claim that China is carrying out a century-long plan to displace the United States is utter nonsense. I disagree. In 1949, Mao Zedong announced the founding of the People's Republic of China, marking the end of a century of humiliation at the hands of foreign aggressors. Deng Xiaoping, I guess how you say that, who put forward the policy of reform and opening up, then paved the way for the nation to become rich. China has stood up, grown rich, and become strong, Xi Jinping said in October 2017, adding that China now embraces the brilliant prospects of rejuvenation. In that process, China has formed various national development plans, both long-term and short-term, but not a single one was ever designed to challenge the United States. This is absurd framing. If you are growing as a military might and power, it's going to challenge the United States because the United States is the military arm of the UN. We are the world police. Why was Russia a challenge during the Cold War, but suddenly China is not? Now, folks, I am not happy that the United States is the world police either. I don't want anyone to be the world police. This is the way of the world, though. And so if it must be someone, I would prefer it be a Western, somewhat Christian nation. I don't think that the leaders in charge are Christians, but I'm just saying that if this is going to be the case, then I would prefer it at least be in our hands when we have some semblance, whether historically perfect or not, of justice. Now, again, the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century here, the United States has been quite a bad actor in many things. But they're not putting Muslims in concentration camps and harvesting their organs and sterilizing them either, as China is. Here it says Yang Zishi, member of the political bureau of the CCP Central Committee, said it nicely when he told reporters on November 9th in Washington, D.C., that development is for the Chinese nation. Everything that we do is to deliver a better life for the Chinese people, to realize rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, and is not intended to challenge or displease anyone, he said. Well, no, but what happens once you build up your nation? Why are you buying up land and investing around the world? Why are you gaining favor with the NGOs, the globalist NGOs? Why is the academics of America or other countries in Europe, why are they feeding you information? Why are you stealing patents? Why are you putting in, honeypots to sleep with Eric Swalwell, who's on the intelligence committee? This is just a very, very naive stance. For those who are not familiar with the two Centurion goals, are an important part of the Chinese overall development plan. The first of the two goals is to build a moderately prosperous society in all respects by the time the CCP celebrates its centenarian in 2021. And the second is to turn China into a modern socialist country by the time it celebrates its 100th anniversary of the founding in 2049. Well, here we are, 2021, and 2049 is coming up in a few years, right? It has nothing to do with challenging the United States for dominance, and distorting the aim of such efforts is a distortion of the truth. For China, our only goal is for the people to have a better life. We don't want to challenge or replace anybody else in the world. We want to build a community of nations and share a future together, yada, yada, yada. Okay, fair enough. What happens, though, when the U.S. economy crashes? Who takes over the power vacuum? A more realistic understanding of China is needed because a common interest between China and the United States far outweigh their differences. As Yang pointed out, a healthy Chinese-U.S. relationship is the best interest for the two people and the world, and both history and reality prove that cooperation is the only right choice for the two countries. Win-win can lead to a better life, he said. Of course, that's what international trade and everything should be about, but that's not how it actually works in practicality, unfortunately. Not too long ago, American political scientist Joseph Nye pointed out that that unlike the former Soviet Union, China and the United States have deep economic and social ties. He then posed the question, can we learn to cooperate and compete at the same time? We're not cooperating and competing, though. China is producing everything. China is outpacing us. China is basically the new market. The West, no one cares about the market over here. We're literally destroying it on purpose. There's no doubt that China and the United States compete in some areas, but that does not make them adversaries. No, it certainly doesn't, but it means lots of other stuff. So that was that article, folks. Again, let me get this up to the top here. This is from the Transnational. China's 100-year plan is all about development, not deception. And that was 3 years ago. Now, I could not disagree more with this guy. I don't think it's about deception either. They're pretty open about it. Most of these folks are open about their plans. Claim China's 100-year plan can be stopped with 4 more years. This was June of 2020, and the idea is that Trump was going to stop it. President Trump has arranged the frustrated world leaders with his America First policy that has, among other goals, pushed for U.S. manufacturing to return to U.S. shores. That would mean thousands of jobs return to America's shores and billions of new dollars invested, but it would also mean wealthy U.S. companies would risk losing cheap labor in communist-run China. So are they against us, folks? Well, on a person-to-person basis, the Chinese is an individual. Like, forget about the nations and the politics. The Chinese as individuals in their cities and their developed areas, in a lot of ways, have a lot of better chance than you do. Because of how our supposed leaders have outsourced everything. Trump has also stated matter-of-factly he admires China for looking out for his own national interests, for its own national interests, which should be the goal of every country's leaders, he has said. Forbes, I don't disagree, part of that is trade, but not basically being in poor trade deals. Forbes reported last year that the U.S.-China trade war begun by President Trump resulted in a year of the weakest economic growth in China in several decades. So it was bad, right? It was bad. Look at all the globalist NGOs. See, if you want to know what to go against what the globalist NGOs have to say. David Rockefeller spoke very specifically, as well as George Soros against Trump. Why? Because they're not part of these globalist plans, folks. The globalists care about enriching themselves and their own power, and want to keep folks like President Trump out, because Trump was not part of that whole scheme. Well, Trump was obviously a very rich man, a wealthy man, a successful man, but was he someone who was trying to sell out America to enrich himself? I don't think so. I do think so about Beijing Biden, though. And I think so about Barack Obama. And I think so about George W. Bush. And I think so about Bill and Hillary Clinton. Steve Mosier, president of the Population Research Institute, says that there is no secret that China has been working furiously for decades to realize its plan to dominate the world, known as the 100-Year Plan, which began in post-World War II China in 1949. Well, apparently the last article didn't understand this. In 2019, Forbes article explained that China's plans were floundering during the 70s and into the 80s. And in the 90s, the West saw economic opportunities and reached out to China, but learned a bitter lesson. China's leaders were eager to grow their economy and became a wealthy superpower, but not leave behind the Communist Party and its state power. As I read to you in the beginning here of the Xi articles, it's all about the party, right? Always all about the party. The military can't be on its own. It has to be politicized, everything. And the greatest thing they did, by the way, was not preventing their people to starve. 1.3 billion, but they had over like 100 million die, right? Or 50 million at least during the Great Leap Forward and the starvation of those times. Let's see if I can get this a little bit better for you guys so you can read this a little bit better. Some of these web pages, folks, are very oddly organized. It's about the best I'm going to do. The centennial of China's communist begins in 2049, Mosier says, so that date is important to Chinese communist leaders, who he argues must be stopped. Comparing U.S. interests to Chinese interests, Mosier tells One News Now that Trump's nationalist approach would never happen in a Joe Biden administration. We know this. Joe Biden's been very pro-China. Joe Biden got rich from this. When he went into the vice presidency, folks, according to, what was it, CBS News, I think, he had a net worth of $37,000. Most politicians are multimillionaires. He had a net worth of $37,000. Now he's a multimillionaire because his brother and his son did business in China, knowing that they would be on the inside eventually, right? That they would have ties to the heads of power, of influence. You must be very naive if you don't believe this. You could say, someone out there will say, well, Bill, that's a conspiracy theory and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, do you even know how the world works? Like, you wouldn't put this past anybody in your work, I guarantee it. You probably worked somewhere in your life where there were shady folks who did all kinds of shady deals. There were nepotism and cronyism and whatever else going on, where people had, did favors for each other and just were not fair. And you think it doesn't work this way by the wealthiest elite who are in charge, who get away with everything and are never convicted, never locked in prison? Let me ask you a question real quick, just a little thought experiment. Do you think Andrew Cuomo is going to be charged with the murder of all of those folks in the nursing homes? Do you think he's actually going to get in trouble for this Me Too allegation that's meant to cover it up? Some of you need to grow up and start thinking like adults instead of children. That's not to say that everyone in the world is a nefarious character. It's just to say that you have to understand the motivations of human beings better. I think that what we have in the case of Joe Biden is a clear case of China collusion. He says the China collusion between Biden and Biden's family members in China is real. In the new Trump campaign ad, the GOP is reminding voters of Biden's glowing words for China at a 2011 speech he delivered at Sichuan University. A more prosperous China will mean more demand for American made goods and services and more jobs back home in the United States, Biden said. So, our desire for your prosperity is not born out of some nobility. It is in our self interest that China continue to prosper. China does not actually import a lot of American goods. They do, to some degree, farming, grain, I think soy, stuff like that. But understand that those industries are federally subsidized, and they're basically they might as well be our own communistic system, right? Or we have federally subsidized agriculture in the United States. We have essentially what the Communist Manifesto wants, one of the 10 planks of having a nationalized agrarian society. Very few small farmers actually make any real money. Such an honest view of trade and wealth likely reflects the view of some Republicans and big business too, since the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has been hammering away at Trump's trade wars in articles such as this. The same GOP ad, which fact checks PolitiFact, flagged for misleading clips and phrases, claimed that Hunter Biden scored $1.5 billion deal with the Bank of China in 2013 on behalf of a firm that employed him. Let's see if I can get rid of this. Nope. But that's the end of the article, basically. PolitiFact acknowledges, however, that the $1 billion deal has been verified by Wall Street Journal and investigated. Yeah, because they just buried it. And that's it. So that's news now and claim China 100-year-old plan or 100-year plan can be stopped. Maybe, but probably not, folks. This is why we're going to enter a civil war, because the folks who work in D.C. want this. They want this from China. It's sad, actually, that they would be against their own people. But we know, based in studies, that the white liberal, if you would, that is a progressive. They don't use the term liberal appropriately anymore, because these people don't want freedom. They're actually, we could call them libertines. I'm going to start calling them that. The libertines, the white libertines, have a out-group preference. They don't care for their own people. It's a really sad thing. That's part of the degeneracy, the mind virus. As my friend Jeremy from the Weekly Narrative would say, the mutants. It's a very strange thing. Why would you not want to take care of your own folks at least first? I'm not saying you shouldn't go out and expand to other people. I'm saying take care of your business first. I am very much all about service to other people. It is what Christ commands of me. It's in part why I do this that I do now. So, anyways, this is from newswithviews.com. China's 100-year plan to become the world's superpower from February 12, 2019. Again, all before the coup. Some enemies can be ignored. Others must be destroyed. And that is by Anonymous. Every communist must grasp the truth. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Mao Zedong. Comrade Mao, whether he was crossing a sea of surging waves or scaling a mountain pass impregnable as iron, always held unwaveringly in his courage, setting a shining example for the Chinese Communist Party, and that was Xi. America has some serious enemies. One is China. The other is Islam. Whoa. Where'd my article go? Technical difficulties, folks. No worries. I got a little history tab right here. There we go. Sorry about that. I just had to hit forward. For some reason, that backed out. Anyways, America has some serious enemies. One of them is China, the other is Islam, and Americans need to know more about both. China has a secret strategy to replace the United States and the world's global superpower. By the way, folks, this here is an article real quick about the Japanese 100-year plan. This is quite an old article. I will probably be covering this in the near future. This is nothing new. Looked at that before. Here is a little article about the 100-year plans for global Islamic domination. I don't think that this is a reality because Islam fights within itself too much. But just saying, there are other 100-year plans. This article is a part of a series on educating people about the menace China has become over the past 70 years. Our very survival of the republic is at risk with the influence of communism inside our country. It's not influence, dude. We've had a communistic, fascistic nation since the early 20th century. Woodrow Wilson really opened this up, and FDR put the final nail in the coffin. In a recent opinion piece from Fox News entitled "Everyone Finally Agrees China Can't Be Allowed to Take Over the World," I thought, well, duh. What finally gave Fox their first clue? The article stated that 2 years ago, when President Xi Jinping laid out his extensive vision for China's role in the global economy, the Belt and Road Initiative, which, by the way, the last video I made in this little series, I had that, a discussion of that on YouTube. You can go find these things if you would like. Interesting. One of the top comments there was, "Yeah, screw sovereignty. I'm all about the New World Order." Xi got the rest of the world rethinking the wisdom of handling China, the keys of the global car, the billions of dollars they've garnered from American trade has enabled them to buy and bribe their way to owning the world. And the dragon has expanded their military strength. They now have the second largest defense budget in the world. And of course, that is second only to us, which doesn't matter if we have so much technology if we don't have a will to fight. And I'm telling you right now, the military is being highly, highly demoralized here in the U.S. And China is all about backing like BLM and other groups. I've covered this before. In videos, they actually sent lines over to BLM members to have chats with them. They like Antifa. This is part of their continued subversion with us, but they probably are messing with us far less than Russia once did, the former Soviet Union. However, despite all that, the Chinese don't need to do as much because it's the mindset is here. It's already in our institutions, and the people that run our institutions like the Chinese model. And that's where you're going to have trouble finding information. But they really do. You have to look at, again, what the NGOs say. Mainland China is the communist-run People's Republic of China. The Republic of China is the tiny island of Taiwan off mainland China, and they don't consider themselves part of that, although the CCP does. The ideological difference is that today one is staunchly capitalist and the other is communist. Taiwan wishes to remain independent, but Chinese President Xi Jinping has upped the pressure on Taiwan, as well as, we know, Hong Kong. Dynasties to communism. When the last Chinese dynasty, the Qing Dynasty, fell in 1911 and 1912, it marked the end of the nation's incredibly long imperial history. The Qing Dynasty collapsed during the second half of the 19th century and the early years of the 20th due to a complicated interplay between international and external factors. The official beginning of the Communist Party of China began with the first Congress held in Shanghai and Jiaojing in July of 1921. So again, we are at that 100-year mark. You guys need to know this history. So we go back here to this, the century of humiliation. And we look at this article from this gentleman saying, oh, this is just about development, not deception. You think the Chinese are not about revenge? Please, because I can tell you right now, they 1000% are. My co-host over on the Ends Justify the Memes, he's actually well versed in Chinese history, modern Chinese history, because this is what he studied in college. He speaks Chinese. He's been to China. He can tell you this. It's there. They held a grudge, guys, and they don't want this to ever happen again. The Kuomintang, or KMT, was the Chinese political party that ruled the mainland China from 1927 to 48, and then moved to Taiwan after the Civil War. The name translates to Chinese National People's Party and was historically referred to as the Chinese Nationalists. The party was initially founded on 25 August 1912 by Sun Yat-sen. It reformed on October 10th, 1998, again led by the Sun Yat-sen, and became the ruling party in China. After the Sun's death, the party was dominated from 27 to 75, and so forth. Talks about these historical differences. Again, you guys can go through this. I don't want to make it forever. I'm already at 40 minutes. The Chinese Communist leader Mao Zedong declared the creation of the People's Republic of China. The announcement ended the costly, full-scale civil war between the Chinese Communist Party and the Nationalist Party, the KMT, which broke out immediately following World War II. Notice again, this is the Nationalist Party. They're saying this, whatever. They were both very much about centralized governments and centralized authority. But this is the same thing, that false dichotomy between the communist and the fascist. One would have probably allowed a little bit more freedom than the other. And what happened was they were in civil war, and then finally, they just murdered and executed tons and tons of people who stood in their way. So here it says, President Richard Nixon. After years of diplomatic isolation, President Nixon, 1972, visit to China was a strategic and diplomatic overture that marked the accumulation of Nixon's administration and resumption of harmonious relations between the countries. Now, important, right before this happened, a year prior to this, Nixon suspended the Bretton Woods Agreement. Now, Bretton Woods was not ideal, but under that agreement, we still had a gold standard of sorts. It was a foreign exchange standard. They completely got rid of that, and we went to complete fiat currency. And the next year, within a year, under the advice of Henry Kissinger, they opened up China. This is why I say, I don't know what was going through these men's heads, but I do know that they were globalist in the things that they enacted, and in part the things they participated in. For instance, Nixon talked about going to the Bohemian Grove meeting once. That's the Alex Jones infiltrated Bohemian Grove thing, where a bunch of people get together and they do the cremation of care, which is an effigy. If you guys don't know, an effigy is a fake sacrifice where they burn an effigy of care to the god Molech. And it's a big play thing. The Bohemian Society came out of a group of theater folk, but like all artists and artisans, they are tied and involved with government officials because they consider themselves the intellectia. And so in any case, Nixon was there once. We know, we have quotes from him talking about it. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest, especially Henry Kissinger, that these were globalist type plans. So I don't think it's that far of a stretch for me to speculate and say that this was done purposefully and was meant to build up China so China could eventually take over. We didn't have these kind of relations with Russia, if you recall. Not at least until Reagan. And Reagan, being very friendly with Russia, actually helped bring about the destruction of the Soviet Union. Says early in his first term, Nixon thought the National Security Advisor, or through his National Security Advisor, Henry Kissinger, sent subtle overtures hinting at warmer relations to the PRC government. After a series of these overtures by both countries, Kissinger flew to a secret diplomatic mission to Beijing in 1971, where he met with Premier Zhu, and whatever. On July 15, 1971, the president shocked the world by announcing on live television that he would visit the PCR the following year. Recall as well, though, Nixon was trying to end the Vietnam War, and guess where the Viet Cong were getting supplies from. So this was a multiple front issue. Here we talk about Mao's Great Leap Forward. I've talked about this before, not going to go through this. Deng Xiaoping, ruled the mainland after the late 1970s. In 1997, he was the most powerful figure in the People's Republic of China until his death in 1997. He restored China to domestic stability and economic growth after the disastrous excesses of the Cultural Revolution launched by Mao. Its stated goal was to preserve Chinese communism by purging remnants of capitalist and traditional elements from Chinese society. Very much so, as the lefties would do today in the West. Under his leadership, China acquired a rapidly growing economy, raising standard of living, considerably expanded personal and cultural freedoms, and growing ties to the world economy. Deng also left in place a mildly authoritarian government and remained committed to the Chinese Communist Party. One-party rule, even while it relied on free market mechanisms to transform China into a developed country. One-party rule is always the case, guys. We are under one-party rule in the United States. It's just an illusion of two parties. Now, there are folks in the Democrat Party who aren't with the party line, and there are folks in the Republican Party who aren't with the Republican Party line, but there are primarily those who are in power, Republican or Democrat, are all in line toward globalism, and it's all leftism, and it will continue to shift this way until the United States has no more power. Now, those folks will still have power and authority because they will be in charge, but they don't care about you, and most of them are multimillionaires, so it doesn't really affect them. It says, however, in May 1989, exactly 70 years after May 4th movement, millions of young Chinese students are crowded into Beijing to demand greater democracy and less repression. This is, of course, the incident of Tiananmen Square. On June 4th, Chinese troops and security police stormed through Tiananmen Square, firing indiscriminately into the crowds of protesters. Thousands of students were killed. Most Chinese don't even know about this today. In 2012, Xi Jinping became the president, ushering an era of increased assertiveness and authoritarianism, all the while cementing Chinese position as a superpower. And it talks about General MacArthur said, I am concerned for the security of our great nation, not so much because of any threat from without, but because of the insidious forces working from within. And that is correct. Stalin viewed Chairman Mao as a junior partner. He even pressured Mao to help communist North Korea in the Korean War. The Battle of the Chosin Reservoir was pitted against 15,000 Allied ground troops against 120,000 Chinese infantrymen. American soldiers died by the thousands. Except for the Chosin was a horrible battle. Any Marine learns about this because the Marines there were nicknamed the Frozen Chosen because they had hardly any supplies. They were very cold, and they were surrounded on all corners. I believe it was Butler. Chesty Puller, thank you. Major General Chesty B. Puller, who said that they're surrounded, so we just got to fight from all sides. Something to that extent, something a little bit more smart aleck. In any case, the Marines there did a very good job with those numbers. But yeah, we had Korea, then Vietnam, and whatever else. So perhaps that was part of the reasoning to open up China. But honestly, folks, I think it has to do more with world globalism, and this stuff, just these little skirmishes, is about who's going to control the world. It's not really about nation state versus nation state or people versus people. It's about governments versus governments and which government gets to run everything in the end. And rest assured, I do not believe that the Chinese government has some sort of good-natured spirit to which they are going to run the world justly. China's 100-year plan to become the world's superpower. Again, you can read this on News with Views. Here we have Decoding Chinese 100-Year Plan. This is from 2017. I'm not going to go through this, just saying you guys can find plenty of articles. Beijing has documented a plan to be the premier global superpower by 2049. It's almost halfway there. That is from the Trumpet. This is from 2016 from NPR. And this is what I wanted to get to. Lastly, but not least, why is China placing a global bet on coal? This was April 29, 2019. Again, long before the coup. But when we always talk about the climate change and the changes that we have to do over here, the carbon taxes that we must pay, the suffering that the first world must go through, while China is allowed to do whatever, we must keep in mind that there is no pressure whatsoever on these nations. And when they finally get there, will there really be then afterwards? I think not. Because why would they listen? You think, Greta's going to have anything to say to Xi? Like he wouldn't have her disappeared? She just wouldn't be gone like a vapor? This is how it works, guys. I mentioned, I can't remember the guy's name. He's a billionaire. Billionaire Chinese national. Like, said some harsh words about the government, disappeared. I don't know if he's returned. He's gone. No one's heard anything from him for weeks. This is what they do. But yeah, they're not going to have nefarious plans as the global leaders. No. China, known as the world's biggest polluter, has been taking dramatic steps to clean up the fight climate change. So why is it building hundreds of coal-fired power plants in other countries? President Xi Jinping hosted the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing over the weekend, promoting his signature foreign policy of building massive infrastructure and trade links across several continents. The forum, attended by leaders and delegates of nearly 40 countries, came amid growing criticisms of Chinese projects, including their effect on the environment. Xi took the highly unusual step for him in meeting with the international journalists, during which he repeated the slogan that he is committed to open, clean, and green development. Well, saying things doesn't mean that you're going to do them. Yet China's overseas ventures included hundreds of electric power plants that burn coal, which is a significant emitter of the carbon, significantly linked to climate change, are scientifically linked. There is no scientific link. Some scientists believe that, yes, the carbon emissions do affect this. In fact, probably one of the premier scientists on carbon, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but says, of course it does. But then you have to square it every time for it to have the same effect. So eventually, it just doesn't have that effect anymore. And he's like, it's just a minor effect too. And we know that the Earth's gone through cycles and phases. We've had higher temperatures than we have today. We also know that we've been coming out of an ice age. I'm not saying the Earth isn't warming. I don't really know, supposedly. But we also know that the numbers are fudged all the time. We had ClimateGate years ago with the email scandal. The 97% study is bunk, guys. I'm not going to get into it. There's no point arguing with ideologues about this. It's just not a true study. It was created by a cartoonist, as far as I recall, and it was very vague in the questioning. And if you talk to many climate scientists, they will tell you otherwise. In any case, days before the forum, in its clean green theme, the latest Chinese-built coal plant opened in Pakistan. The plants are significant investments at a time when most nations of the world, including China, have committed to fighting climate change. When you put money down and put steel into the ground for coal-fired power plants, says Cunningham, it's a 40 or 50-year commitment. In one sense, China pushes for coal is not surprising. China knows how to build coal plants, and it's the world's largest consumer, drawing more than 70% of its electricity from coal. Why would they do this? Well, I'll tell you why they do it. Because they know how, It's cheap, it's easy, provides power, and it gives them wealth. They don't care about your supposed climate agendas, folks. They just don't. They care about their own agenda. But facing overwhelming pollution levels, China has restrained the growth of its coal industry at home. Well, sure, they'll start developing nuclear and stuff like that, where we aren't doing that here in the West when we should be. For many years, 4 huge electric power plants based on burning coal within the capital city, Beijing, contributed to the city's choking smog. But within the past 4 years, all 4 stopped burning coal. Why? It was in Beijing. Why would you want your biggest, most important city to be basically polluted? You don't want that. You don't want visitors coming and thinking how horrible it is. You want it to look clean. You want them to think that, oh, look at this dictatorship. Look how wonderful everything is when you have a dictatorship. And there are crazy people out there right now, like regular average Joes. I know, because I've talked with them, like on Reddit and stuff, who think that that's a good thing, that having a dictatorship's a good thing. I mean, Bernie Sanders thinks you not having any choices in the USSR and Venezuela and whatever else are good things. A visit by NPR on Saturday to one of the plants, the Qing Beijing thermal power station, showed that it now burns natural gas. Still a contributor to climate change, but overall considerably cleaner. Actually, natural gas emits almost no CO2 comparatively. The air quality is much better than before. Okay. While closing old plants, China's leaders have limited the the building of new ones. The government has promoted wind and solar energy. It has produced so many solar panels that it has reduced prices for them worldwide. Why? Because it's a commodity that people are preaching about. So they're basically yielding to somewhat to the market, and they have the resources to do so. But the Chinese engineers, metal workers, and laborers who built the coal-fired plants must be kept employed. And Cunningham says many are going abroad. They're building energy projects in other nations on Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Why would they do that? Well, because they don't care about those other nations. Clean up our environment, pollute elsewhere because, hey, we get money. China has made more than, like I said, guys, I don't pre-read these articles. I find them, I look at them, like grossly look at the titles, whatever. I'm like, I'm going to use that. I put them in whatever order because this stuff just makes sense. Like once you start getting into information, you read enough, and you understand the general motivations and the trends, you just know, and that's why I end up saying things before the article says it. More than 244 billion in energy investment abroad since 2000, much of it in recent years, according to Boston University database. The bulk is in oil and gas, but much more than 50 billion has gone toward coal. China has done a very good job of emphasizing the target of greening the Belt and Road. Yeah, they actually still produce over half of all carbon emissions, so I don't think so. Here it says, there are concerns beyond climate. The coal projects in developing nations are built with Chinese loans, which the developing states must repay. There's a widespread view among investors that as coal industry declines in much of the world, coal is a bad investment. Not if you want power. It's cheap. If you want to take your nation from third world, not industrialized, everyone living in poverty, barely being able to get clean water and decent food, to first world, industrialized, clean food, sanitary food and water conditions, regular food, not having to worry about starving to death, medical treatment, all that stuff. You need energy. How do you get energy? Well, the cheapest way to get energy is to burn coal right now. Most of these countries that don't have this, people burn dung, feces, on a regular basis for fuel. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, a Chinese-funded international institution based in Beijing, told NPR that it applies rigorous standards to its investment and has yet to support a coal-fired power plant anywhere. In most countries today, it doesn't really make financial economic sense anymore to invest in coal-powered plants, said Vice President uh, Jacom von Amsberg. Renewable energy offers cleaner alternatives. It's also way more expensive, way more inefficient, and has a number of problems that does not allow it to be sustainable at 100%. You have to have backups. Says they were ready to answer such concerns. We're not intending to transfer pollution to other countries. Okay. We are trying to create development opportunities. That's just what I said. And they're getting money. In neighboring Vietnam, a country highly dependent on coal, China is a major investor in the energy sector. China is involved in 15 coal power plants in operation, under six under construction, at least 2 in the planning stages, according to Nguyen Tai Hong. And we can keep going. Well, that's pretty much it. So it doesn't really say why. There's still a question of how to supply energy sustainability, blah, blah, blah. But I can tell you why. Follow the money. It's the almighty dollar, folks. And China is going to continue to expand, and they will become the world power. And I'll tell you why, because America doesn't do this. We give away our money. We allow businesses to go to other countries so they don't have to pay corporate taxes. We outsource all of our stuff. So, and again, like, I'm not necessarily against that. It's good for the business, but it doesn't help Americans. And that becomes a problem because, again, you have to take care of your own house. So, again, guys, some differing opinions here, but just remember that there was a century of humiliation and that China still emits 55% of all emissions for the climate change thing. According to this guy, it's not a deception. They don't want to take over the world, but I would think otherwise. They are going to be the world superpower, and they keep betting on coal. 2-year-old article. Nothing's going to change. They're worried about the bottom line, and that is superiority, and they will never have a century of humiliation again. It's pretty much the lesson here, folks. So, guys, with all that, I will be back on Tuesday with that. I will be, of course, pointing out my regular content with the quick shots and the story time and all that. Catch us this Sunday over on the Ends Justify the Memes at 7 p.m. Eastern. We will have Kit Cope there. Unfortunately, we crossed wires about when he was supposed to be on, so it will be this Sunday. So for sure, I got some text messages from him, so we are all good. It happens. I'm not the best scheduler. So in any case, guys, please like, share, subscribe, follow me on the other places, all the other things in case YouTube ever yeets me, which is always possible. Be aware that those are all linked in the description. Don't be a boomer. Go down there, figure it out on your own. If you guys have any questions or comments, leave them below, or you can go and email me. That is, again, on my YouTube page. It is linked there. I'll get back to you eventually, probably. I'll try to interact with the audience. With all that said, guys, this has been All Minus One, and I wish you all well.